Pipeline logistics. There isn't a logistics operation in Canada that isn't affected in some way by pipelines that carry crude oil across the country and into the United States. Yet not many logistics professionals outside of the pipeline industry fully understand the roles pipelines play in the energy supply chain, let alone the logistical complexities that arise from being a highly regulated common carrier with a strained network capacity. With us today is someone who sees himself as working in the transportation industry. The mode just happens to be pipeline. David Bryson has been with Enbridge for 20 years, where he's held many roles, most currently as VP of Customer Service Liquids Pipeline. In this position, David leads departments responsible for the infrastructure, planning, network logistics, and service delivery. Michael has a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Western Ontario. Ontario boy, huh? Welcome to David.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Okay, so I'm sandwiched in between Martin's presentation, which was fascinating. No spreadsheets in this presentation, I know, I can promise you that. And in our business, we haven't got anything as exciting as Halo 4. Everybody has to keep their heads on during our work. And then I was peeking under here, and I think there's like a clown nose and some props there. So I'm going to talk about pipelines, which isn't that exciting. So anyway, just bear with me for a few minutes here. So great to be here. Interesting to think through all the logistical challenges across the vast number of businesses that are here. I'll give you a bit of an overview of Enbridge at a high level, and then I'll drill down specifically into the liquids pipelines business, which I'm part of, and talk about our pipeline network a bit. In my 20 years at Enbridge, we've grown from about a $6 billion company to around a $45 billion company. So as many of you in here can appreciate, just trying to manage the operation and the logistics of a large company in a steady state format is challenging enough. But when it's growing and changing on a continuous basis, it makes it that much more challenging. What am I pointing at with my pointer? There we go. So to state it simply, we transport energy, we distribute energy, we generate energy. So for about 65 years, Enbridge has become a leader in the safe and reliable delivery of energy in North America. We're very proud to be recognized as one of the Global 100 most sustainable corporations. And the liquids pipeline business makes up about 75% of our earnings. But we're working hard on our other legs of the stool, so to speak. So on the gas side, we have presence in gas pipelines. On our gas distribution network, primarily in Ontario and upstate New York and New Brunswick, we have a 160-year history there. That gas utility was actually in place in the days of the lamplighter before pipelines actually took natural gas to Ontario, and the gas was manufactured by coal and then lit the streets of Toronto. And now we're really taking a strong foray into the renewables area. We have about 1,800 megawatts and growing of renewable energy. That's made up of wind, solar, and geothermal power. That's about enough power to light 600,000 homes. So we're the biggest solar power producer in Canada and the second biggest wind power producer in Canada. Just looking at a map, this covers all of our operations throughout North America, but I'll start drilling down now a little bit more into the liquids pipelines piece. We started as a small diameter pipeline out of Western Canada. The first pipeline was built from Edmonton to Superior, Wisconsin, and then the crude oil was actually put on ships onto the Great Lakes and moved to refineries in Sarnia. And it's amazing to think, I think the construction window for that single pipeline from start to finish was in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 months. And now it takes us, it can take us a decade sometimes to plan and build a pipeline, which maybe some of you know from reading the paper. So now the system capacity has grown from that single pipeline to a system that on any given day moves over 2 million barrels of product across the Canada-US border in Manitoba. It's the longest crude pipeline system in the world. We have approximately 25,000 kilometers of pipe across North America. We obviously have a significant presence in both the oil sands region here in Alberta and the growing Bakken formation in the Dakotas and Saskatchewan. And we transport about 53% of the US-bound Canadian production on any given day, and that accounts for about 15% of the total crude imports into the U.S. So along our system, we essentially move it from the source to refineries in Regina, Minneapolis, Chicago, Ontario, onto Montreal, Illinois, onto our large storage hub in Cushing, Oklahoma, and now onto the U.S. Gulf Coast. Just take one minute to take a quick step back. Sat down for breakfast, and I think it was about 15 seconds before Jim, who we were talking to, I'm not sure where Jim is, we started talking about Gateway and Keystone XL and Energy East and TMX and are all those pipelines ever going to get built? So times have changed drastically for the pipeline industry. It used to be a fairly quiet industry. One of our presidents about 15 years ago when we had an expansion project, he said, everybody enjoy this moment because this is the very last expansion project we're ever going to have. And we've probably tripled or quadrupled in size since then. But there's no doubt the public trust has been shaken in the last number of years with high-profile events. We had one of those. Macondo in the Gulf of Mexico was another significant event. PG&E's event in California was very significant. So all of those events shook the public trust. So we have to work very, very hard as an industry, even though at the core of our safety record, it's very, very good. We have to build the public trust back up and maintain that trust. Without that trust of the stakeholders, growing our business, operating our business in our core markets becomes very, very, very difficult. So it's critical that we meet the changing public expectations, and it's not just about talking about those things and what we're doing. It's about generating a track record of safety and environmental performance and walking the talk. So it's really changing the way fundamentally we have done business over the last few years at our company, and many of our peers are in the same boat. This is a supply profile. The left one is basically the Western Canadian Basin. Fairly flat on the bottom, so you could see if it was up to conventional oil production, we wouldn't be expanding much at all. The blue line rising is the Canadian oil sands production that is growing and is forecasted to grow, assuming we can keep building infrastructure to support that. The graph on the right is the Bakken formation. So we had a presence there before, and you may have heard about shale oil and shale gas development. These are deposits like the Bakken had essentially peaked and was declining, or was at best flat. And because they've developed new fracturing technologies and new extraction technologies in these shale formations, there's been a real boom of oil and gas production throughout a few significant deposits in North America. So luckily our network starts up in the oil sands and essentially runs right through the Bakken, which is ideally positioned. So CAP, the Canadian the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, which I think Greg Stringham was here yesterday, and us and other industry participants spend a lot of time analyzing these forecasts. And so depending on where you are and how you analyze the data and what view you have, these forecasts may look slightly different. But the one thing they all have in common is they're generally all rising. So we have an infrastructure challenge to deal with to generate that growth. So with that profile in mind, a growing profile, we work hard to address the bottlenecks in our existing system, and we work hard to develop the infrastructure to allow more production to get to markets. So this is a slide that shows an all-time historic amount of infrastructure development we're doing on our system. We have about $37 billion worth of projects on our books right now. The lion's share of those are in the liquids pipeline space. And the bulk of those are developing new light crude and heavy crude markets in these areas, and those are in thousands of barrels per day. So over the next 3 years, we'll be taking that production from the west, moving it to these key refinery markets, and allowing the producers and the refiners to not only get hopefully good netbacks for their production and make money on the upstream side, but provide a reliable source of crude oil throughout North America for those volumes. So I'll drill down just a layer now. So you may think, well, you put the crude in one end and it's a big pipe and you take it out the other end. It's not quite that simple. Over the years, we've grown quite a network. In the west, we have 6 main pipelines that run 5 of them that run all the way to Superior. Line 65 runs to Clearbrook, but we have significant trunk lines that run all the way across the prairies to a main breakout terminal in Superior, Wisconsin, which was the original termination point of our first pipeline. So it's very similar to other hub and spoke systems that some of you may have there. The volumes are broken out into a large number of tanks there and then distributed through other pipelines south and east. We essentially have a high volume, relatively low cost of service offering. And we operate this system essentially by designing and executing an optimized and steady state operating plan. That is our objective at the operations level, to maximize our efficiency. So our transportation system shares characteristics from other mass transportation systems that are represented here today. There might be a few concepts that, for those that aren't intimate with the pipeline operations, that I'll just share with you. So obviously, it's a fixed infrastructure. So it's buried, it's bolted to the ground. It takes many years to build, not easy to change. So when we plan something, we spend a lot of time building it, and then we have to get it right, because it's not easy to turn on a dime with a pipeline. Very expensive to replace or expand. As I said, right now we have in excess of $35 billion worth of projects underway. And generally the product moves in one direction. We have both common carrier and contract systems. So on the head of our pipeline system and on the tail of our pipeline system, many customers have signed up for very long-term contracts, so 20-year contracts in some cases, that they'll move a fixed volume each day for 20 years. In the middle, the vast majority of our trunk line system is a common carrier system. So if any customer shipper comes to us and is creditworthy, they can essentially move volume on any given month. So you can imagine you're creating a relationship with a customer in those cases that one month they could ship and another month they could move to a competitor or another pipeline. Crude oil is not just crude oil. We have about 45 commodities today, with another 10 commodities that are related to refined products. So we segregate those commodities by pipeline, by tank, but in only a few cases do we actually put a mechanical, we call it a pig, which is essentially a plug, very large plug, between the commodities in a pipeline system. The rest of the cases, the vast majority of the cases, you'll have two different grades or two different commodities of a pipeline, and you work to have the flow rate on the pipeline going fast enough that the turbulent flow is created in there, and the interface between those two is actually compressed because of the mechanical behavior of the fluid. And then we essentially cut halfway in between there. So this commodity gets a little bit of this product and this one gets a little bit of that product. So that's essentially how we manage this complex batching operation. That's a little different for things like refined products like diesel fuel and jet fuel and things like that. You cut those products neat so you don't degrade the product, obviously. The other interesting thing with our business, it's a monthly commercial cycle. So it's been like this forever. Essentially, all the nominations for the next month are received late in the prior month. All that planning is done. We create our plan around that, and we execute in the following month. So if you can imagine, we get the nominations. We literally have about a week to build an entire schedule throughout the entire network and move 2 million barrels of fluid through that system. So a little bit of an analogy. There's a couple interesting analogies. That's why these conferences are good. You can sit back and think about these things. But our system, you could think about it and say, and I have in the past, it's a lot like a rail network. Crude isn't fungible. It's not like natural gas. The actual crude somebody puts in Edmonton is the crude that they actually want in Cushing, Oklahoma. So they actually have to wait until that crude moves through the system to take it out. And the crude oil moves about as fast as you can walk. Natural gas moves about as fast as you drive a car. Crude oil moves about as fast as you can walk along a pipeline system. So, I think to myself, well, it's a lot like a rail network because things are in batches, they move around and they get moved to the next location. But this analogy would say it's perhaps like an automotive plant. So in an automotive plant, like Ford, making a Ford Focus, you're going to create a relatively low cost, relatively high quality car that's very predictable. You want all your parts coming into the plant. You want minimal interruptions as the production happens. And then you want all the cars to go at the back end of the plant. And the more you can do that every day, the more you're happy as a business owner and the more the customer gets exactly what he wants. Kind of like the Model T. So, in our system, it is very much like that. It's a very big system. It's very sensitive to disruptions if you want to maximize the throughput. So essentially, on a monthly basis, we build schedules and we rely on those feeders and producers to bring in those products to us on a ratable schedule. If they don't, it disrupts our business, it disrupts the pipeline system. So those things, we work very hard with our producers to bring those products in. We then have to schedule all of those products through our system, through pipelines, through tankage. And then at the other end, your refiners and your downstream customers need to be on the game with minimal disruption so they can actually take the product away in a ratable form. So if you think about that, that's fairly similar to an auto plant as well, a lot of the same logistical challenges. The difference between probably us and Ford would be that 8 or 9 customers of ours pay about 80% of our bills. So we deal with very large, influential customers, and then there's quite a few small ones. So when you're dealing with those customers, and they may be an integrated company that has production on one end and a refinery on the other end, and these are real problems they have, the real problems we have, we continually walk the fine line of dealing with all those customer issues on a daily and monthly basis, but actually trying to keep this ratable system moving so we can maximize the throughput and be as efficient as possible. So as I'm getting close to wrapping up, I'll just turn to our organizational structure for a moment. So as Catherine said, the area I'm responsible for currently is the customer service area. So customers, like I said, have choices. There's other modes of transportation, such as rail, there's other pipelines. If we have this common carrier system, that the relationship is really a 30-day relationship between us and our customers, we have to thrive in that model. You have to have an overarching goal of being best in class, designing an operating plan that is steady state, predictable, gives the customers what they want in terms of repeatability and quality. And which dovetails with Martin's, we strive to achieve this excellence through constant measurement, analytics, feedback loops, trying to continuously improve the system. The customer service group is essentially broken into three pieces, and this is likely very similar to many of the groups here in the room. The infrastructure planning folks, lots of engineers in that group, they're looking at our system, they're looking way out to 10 years saying, I understand our production profile, I understand the refinery scene at the other end. What's the system need to look like in 10 years in terms of capacity, terminaling, pipelines, tanks, etc., pumping capacity? The network logistics team is really the 1 month out to 24 months. So they're taking the existing hardware that's in the ground and they're trying to work the operational plan, looking at line splits. Is there more optimal ways to move crude from one pipeline to another? How does our tank allocation work to best protect the product quality for the customers? And then the service delivery area is essentially the day-to-day people that make this thing happen. So those people execute the schedule, deal with our interconnecting customers on a daily basis. They communicate with our very large control center in Edmonton that actually starts and stops pumps and makes deliveries and issues what we call pump orders to them and makes the system work. So they're essentially kind of the nerve center of the logistical operation within Enbridge. So under that, we have a lot of support organizations like an analytics group, a petroleum quality group, an oil accounting group, capacity management team, etc. So in summary, life takes energy. Hopefully we can all agree to that. We feel like we play a vital role in providing that energy to people across North America. We're an energy company, but we're also a very large transportation and logistics company. The challenges are many, from designing and building billions of dollars worth of infrastructure and physically making sure we can get pipe in the ground to actually making sure we can move the product safely and efficiently through our pipeline system, all the way from the wellhead to the refinery gate on any given day. We believe we're in a good position to do that. We're very fortunate with a geographic footprint in that we tie very long-term deposits to key markets all across North America. But it's not easy. Building infrastructure is not easy these days. We have to work very hard at that. And because of some of the dynamics I've described, we have to work very, very hard with our customers to not give them a reason to go elsewhere. So when we look back on all of this, now more than ever, our right of entry, our building blocks have to be operational excellence, no environmental incidents, minimizing operational incidents, etc., building the public trust we talked about before. Because if we don't do a good job at that, essentially the basics, nothing else will matter. So with that, that's the summary. Hopefully that's a bit of an overview, and I will open it up to any questions anybody has. Do we have our microphones necessary?
Do you use any, in doing your operational planning every month, do you use any operations research or linear programming tools in order to optimize the network?
Yes, we do. Most of the tools that we currently use are in-house tools. and a lot of that is based on historical information. We've currently undertaken a lot of work to improve those tools. Even a year ago, we wouldn't have had a formal analytics team. And now we've stood up an analytics team, and their job is essentially to gather data, understand that data, and predict what our system would look like. Because it's growing bigger all the time, and that planning period before the operational cycle isn't likely to grow anytime soon. It's incumbent on us to spend as much time as we can understanding what's predictable for the next month, and then when the nuances of those operational changes come in, we can react to them very quickly. So I would say we're on in the early stages of a significant growth pattern in that space. And as Martin knows, in working with our group, we're very active in that area. And I think probably because of the sophistication of the customers and the growing size of our business, we were likely able to get a lot of things done manually a few years ago that going forward we won't be able to do. So we're putting a lot of effort in there. But I would say we're in our infancy in my mind.
What's the competitive landscape look like in the pipeline industry? I'm guessing that, you know, the cost to enter into the industry is obviously very prohibitive. So what's that look like?
It depends on the area. So in the Alberta Canadian oil sands region, for example, there's more players. The pipelines are maybe a bit shorter, so you're not necessarily putting out as much cash, but still incredibly expensive projects. But you're right, building a pipeline that is worth $5, $6, $7, $8 billion. There's only a few players that can take that, but there is a tremendous amount of competition compared to what it used to be. I mean, it used to be really almost a utility model where we were the big common carrier system and all the crude moved on our system. It's not that way anymore. But the thing that has really got all of the companies focused is how do you actually get infrastructure built? Even if you have a leg up on your competitor, how do you physically make sure you can get approvals, get the stakeholders, get the planning, and physically put the infrastructure in the ground? That's a massive undertaking. But I would say the competition today is drastically increased to what it was a few years ago. Yep. Not to mention many of the people that are in this room in rail. They know how the volumes on rail have increased dramatically over the last couple of years.
David, you'd mentioned just about getting all the approvals and all that. I'm from BC and obviously saw all the media hype over the Gateway project and all that. And I found it kind of surprising that, I don't know if it's a wrong statement, but it seemed as though Enbridge was ill prepared to deal with a lot of the protests that were coming from the various groups out there. And it came from First Nations, it came from the environmentalists. And I kind of thought to myself early on that you guys probably could have prepared yourself a little bit better in regards to arming yourself with the stats to talk about safety records, about what the value would be for economic development in the area. Because I mean, I personally was involved in the forest industry in northern BC and watched it die. Yep. And you know, it meant some great things for northern British Columbia, and I thought you guys could have parlayed that into a more positive outcome.
Yep, valid criticism. You know, and again, I think things have changed drastically. Like if I look back at the work that's gone into that, literally we were working on a gateway type project. We've been working on it for 10 years. Thousands of stakeholder interactions and dealing with landowners, Aboriginal people, for example, offering up the Aboriginal people an actual equity stake in the pipeline, up to 10% is where we're at. So I think it goes back to what I was saying. Things have changed so fast. On the surface, it looks like we're totally ill-prepared, and you know, if we had to redo, would we do things differently? But you're going along through that cycle of traditional project planning and consultation and trying to get everybody pulled together, and the foundation is shifting underneath your feet. So how do you keep up with that? And our peers across the street from us, TransCanada, are dealing exactly the same thing with XL. You know, on the surface, you could say, well, boy, they were ill prepared for that, but they thought they were doing all the right things, and then, you know, underneath their feet, the foundation's shifting. So it's a new world. It just is.
If you don't mind, just one other follow-up. You had mentioned, obviously, there's been a lot of pushback because of the dangers environmentally with crude movement.
Right.
So is there not more encouragement? There's been some talk about refineries sort of around that the wellhead region,
Right.
To reduce that possibility of environmental damage, if it indeed would ever happen.
Yep. Yeah, then there is lots of talk about that. I'm sure a lot like your businesses, there's, you know, those things get analyzed, and a lot of times things get made on economic decisions. And generally, the driver behind a pipeline like Northern Gateway wasn't to produce refined products and export them. It was a desire by California and the Pacific Rim, et cetera, to actually get raw crude product and refine it in their own refineries. So, you know, again, that's a completely different proposition, and there's lots of people looking at that. We generally, as a transportation service provider, we're in the middle of that discussion, but we wouldn't necessarily be driving that discussion. That would be a discussion between, you know, people that are producing the product and the people that are going to use it at the end, and say, well, do I really want crude oil or do I want diesel fuel? And how do we make that work? So, but I understand there's a lot of people saying, well, if you just had been dealing with refined products, this would have been a lot easier because you wouldn't have to worry about the crude oil, right? So that's just another dynamic.
Anybody else?
One more question
We have
here.
one over there.
You realize I'm standing between you and the clown noses and whatever else is under this white tablecloth here.
It's more of a technical question. So you talked about turbulent flow in the pipeline and the different products there.
Right.
So how do you determine when to essentially change the valve position?
It's essentially well, this is a little bit of technology, kind of interesting. So in the old days, when I was in the control center, I managed the control center in Edmonton, we have densitometers on the pipeline. So it's actually measuring the density of the product, and they'll be upstream of the delivery point that you're going to make to a refinery, for example, or a tank. So the operator would be sitting there watching it, and you're looking for a density of X and a density of Y, and when the interface gets, when you start coming down that curve and it gets in the middle, say even 8 or 10 years ago, the operator would be watching for that, and he would start opening the valve. So he would actually cut it on midpoint. And of course, like I said, depending on the products, it's different. But that would be a manual intervention by the operator looking at the density profile. Now we've developed what we call a cut point calculator. So actually, it's a piece of software in the control center, and we've actually automated exactly what I just described. So it's looking, now we've got another densitometer, so it's looking at a profile that's coming, and then once it does come, it's actually monitoring it and knows what this density is and knows what that density is, and when it gets halfway in between, it automatically starts swinging the valve and cuts the batch into a tank or to the refinery. So kind of a neat bit of technology. Fairly simple, but very important.
I think we're going to wind it up. Not
Okay,
because we're out of questions, and certainly not because we're not finding this very, very fascinating. I know I certainly am, but we need to move on.
Yes,
Thank you,
well, thank you very
David.
much. Thank you.